Hello. So this is just a update of what we kind of covered the other night when the internet started to go a bit crazy. So I'm going to be showing you how I created these three materials here. As you can see, each one of them has actually got some form of information in there. So these are just literally flat planes, nothing very special about them. This one on the bottom left here, this hexagonal pattern, has got quite a lot of high bump map information. The displacement map as well, really bringing the geometry off. You can see here we've got this really nice broken material over here, like broken tiles, as well as some marbling here. Now from this angle, what we've also got is everything looks pretty flat. That's because just how I position my camera relative to the HDRI in the background doesn't really give it much of a highlight. But if I move my camera around a little bit, excuse the load, it might take a little bit of time to actually render this. You can then see that the highlight really does jump out on some of these. The system I'm using at the minute is not the one I was using last night. It's not as powerful, so just excuse some of the loading times and some of the rendering it might have to do. But creating these three things is relatively simple. I understand what I was doing wrong. I was actually missing a couple of steps out last night. I think it was just the stress of trying to make it all work on a short notice. I just forgot a couple of things. But it is just as simple as what I showed you last night, and what we didn't do, it's 2 or 3 different steps. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just clear a new scene up, bring in a HDRI, bring in a plane, and I'm going to create one of these just to show you the process. Or I might create a couple of different versions of them. So I'll start the render, so you can see here that they are just flat planes. You can see that the specularity, I don't know if you can see that on the actual video, but the specularity is actually there. There is a specular pattern on each one of these that relate to the surface. That's about the colour, and the specularity is about the only 2 things we can really see outside of a render. Everything else, however, needs to be rendered to see. And it's really, really cool. This sort of stuff is super cool. Now what we're going to be using is just a bump map or a displacement map, and that's just a black and white version of a height map. The normal map is the purple version, and we have places where we can use that, and we have places where we use bump maps, and there are points when we kind of combine them. The difference between a bump map and a normal map is a normal map has all the normal information calculated into the actual image. That's why you have all those colours. Each one of those colour palettes, each one of those colour sections basically tells the renderer, tells the camera, tells the light in which direction it needs to cast a shadow, in which direction it needs to cast a highlight, and in which direction certain surfaces should be facing. A bump map, and it's relatively cheap to actually process a normal map, because it doesn't actually deal with any visual height. It's more of the way that the lights and cameras react to a surface. A bump map, however, it's a little bit harder a little bit more kind of costly to process, but with that, there's a lot of stuff we can do with it. So one is, a bump map is just a height value, so it's up and down. We don't have any angles we can do, so we can't have anything tilted slightly to the side to reflect the light coming in from a 45-degree angle, which a normal map can do. But what they very, very easily use for is just height information. One, to react to light, to kind of like give an indication of depth or a shadow or anything like that. Not quite as processed as a normal map. The other one is that a displacement, and we'll be using displacement a lot inside architectural visualization, product modeling, anything which has a pre-rendered value to it. We'll be using displacement map quite a lot, because that will give us, it's very, very noticeable on this one down here, oh, and it's disappeared. That's just down to the system I'll show you on this one. The displacement map actually gives you, it actually affects the geometry. It does kind of, it adds geometry to the geometry we have on a render layer basis. So it doesn't actually work inside the viewport, but when we render it, that's when we see this new kind of change to the geometry. But as you can see here at the edge, if I just kind of like highlight over in this corner, top corner, it doesn't quite work in some areas. It can be destroyed, it can be defeated, but we don't necessarily rely on bump maps to do everything for us. That's why we're using a combination. But just for now, I'm going to show you how to set up a bump map along with images. So I'm just going to delete all them. So I've got my sky dome here. You can see it's just quite a bright sky, 360 degrees. The shadows that are created from this are quite, they're not super strong. They're strong, but there's some, it's not as powerful as, say, like in the middle of the desert. So all I'm going to do is bring in a plane, and that's what we're going to put everything on. So what we want to do is, currently we've got our material set up as a lambert, because the default to any material is going to be a lambert, our lambert 1 here. So obviously that's not what we want to use for this. We want to use a AI standard surface, because that has the ability to render the bump, the displacement, all the things we want to render nicely. So what I'm going to do is open up our hypershade, which up here, the little blue dot, a little blue ball with a white dot on it. There we go. So you can see I've got a couple of materials already pre-set up. I've got a broken tile, which you saw before. I've got a hex, which you saw. I've got a marble, which you saw. And I also have a metal grill, which has some opacity, which I'll show you later on. Quite cool. As you can see, our network is identical for each one of them. That's the network for our. Oops, a little bit. Just a little bit. That's the network for our broken tiles. That's the network for our hexagonal grid. That's the network for our marble. And this is the network for our metal grid. Now you can see it's a little bit different, this one, because this one's actually got an opacity map as well, which is being plugged into the opacity channel. Now we've not got a displacement, we've not got an extra thing sat in here, which we should do, but for this that we've just created here, I'm going to apply a new material that we haven't actually got inside here. So what I'm going to do is just click create, down to AI surfaces, an AI standard surface. That creates our new AI standard surface, which I'm going to name concrete tiles, because what I'm going to be creating is a concrete tile. And you can see, because I was on the network grid for something, on the network graph for something else, we've kind of got a bit of a mess coming on here. So if I just hold right click, down to graph network on our concrete tiles, it's just going to only have what I'm working on there. Now what I did last night as well is I just cleaned up this whole hypershade to get rid of some excess information. I don't really need this create menu to the side, so I'm going to delete that. I don't need this bin here, so I'm going to delete that. And over here, I don't really need this material viewer either, so I'm going to click that. And another thing I'm going to do, and this is something that it makes an impact on the renderer a little bit, but taking as much stress off the engine as we can, especially if you're working off a laptop like I am here, is if I come to the top left here, we have this little blue on sign. And you can see there when I hover over it, it says, when on, allow swatches to update automatically. When off, prevent swatches from updating if their parameters are changed. Now I'm going to turn that off. So I have to actually update anything that I'm changing. That again, it's just going to take a little bit of stress off the engine while I'm doing this. Okay, so I'm not actually going to look at my material yet as well. I'm just going to look at my my material graph. So this blue box, like I said last night, this is the actual thing which is plugged into our material. This is the thing that creates the image on our surface. We're just plugging stuff into it. So this is the thing where we plug this concrete tiles grey node here. This is what we plug everything into to create the image, and then this is basically plugged out to the thing which actually shows the image, if that makes sense. So without this, we wouldn't see anything. So this is actually applied to our object, and then we're actually using this to create our image. Now, depending on what we actually want to use, or so if we go to create, we've got all these different types of AI whatevers. Depending on what we're doing, excuse me, this might look different, but this is just the AI standard shader node, which has got all the information we need. Cool. So what I'm going to do, like I did last night, is just in a grey area, I'm going to hit tab, so we get our little search box up. I'm going to type in AI image. I'm going to create that. And I'm actually going to do that 4 more times. So tab, AI image, tab, AI image, tab, AI image. And now we can absolutely copy paste these as well. There's no problem with that. It's just that on these systems, on these licenses, we'll always get that student license box up, which can get a bit annoying. And I'm actually going to name each one of these as well, so I know what I'm dealing with. So this top one is going to be my color, so I'm going to call this my base. Oh, no, I put that in the wrong site then. I'm going to put it there. Base there. This one's going to be my specularity or roughness. I'm going to call this rough spec, so I know what it is. This is going to be controlling my height information, so I'm going to call this either height or bump. And this here, this is going to be controlling the displacement, which is what is going to give us actually give us that height that we want to see. Okay. So, and I'm going to pre-plug these in as well. So the base color, I just want to use the color out for this. I'm going to drag that out into the base color, because we want to use all 3 color channels, and we're not using an alpha, so we're just plugging that in. So for the rough spec, what we want to do is actually still using the out color, but we want to use the red channel of this. So we're dragging that out, and then plug that into our spec roughness. You can see that these are actually technically being seen as alphas, like monochromatic images, and not using a full RGB color value, so that's why we can plug them into the green channels. The height map, now we can't plug this directly into our normal camera straight away. Remember, we have to put something in between it, which is basically saying this image is actually a bump map, so read it as a bump map. It's very similar to this. This is basically telling us how everything here is being read. So I'm going to click in Grayspace, tab in Grayspace, AI bump, and then we've got AI bump 2D and AI bump 3D. So I want the AI bump 2D, because it's going to be a 2D image we're using. That. Now the alpha from this, or the image from this, is going to be black and white. So we're not going to use any color values, we're only going to use the alpha value. So we're going to pull the alpha value into the bump map section. We're not going to do anything with the bump height. We can do stuff with bump height. We can actually plug stuff into here, like ranges and ramps to actually control that, but what we're just going to do is a very basic set, is just go alpha out into bump map. So that's basically going to be controlling the actual image of the bump map, and then out value into normal camera, like that. And the last thing to do inside the graph network is just to grab our displacement, grab the color, and just plug that into displacement shader. Okay? And if we want to clean up your workspace a little bit and keep everything nice and neat, and each one of these little shaders, you have these little nodes, you have these little 3 horizontal boxes. If you click them, it gives you multiple kind of values or multiple ranges of information, going from the basic to nothing to more to more. So I just want to click it till I've just got a single thing like that. It just keeps everything nice and neat. So there we go. So it just keeps on my graph network a little bit neater. And if you're like me, you need things to be a little bit neat. Cool. Alright then. So now we're actually trying to plug our images into these areas. So my base color, that's going to be my base is my base color. So over here inside the base color attribute, we're going to find image name, find the folder, and we're going to navigate to our preferred texture, which for me is going to be concrete bricks. Find our base color, and there we go. So that's now on there. So now if I actually minimize this and then turn on textures, oh, sorry, we've not actually applied our new material to this. This is still a Lambert, so what I'm going to have to do is hold right click, go down to assign existing materials, and find concrete tiles. There we go. So there we've got our texture actually applied. Now, like I said yesterday, what I want you to do is just any of these sort of base color type of textures, just have a look at them and just really analyze how little extra information is on there. You've got the color information, but there's very, very little height information or shadow information. This is a deliberate thing because we're actually going to be controlling shadow and height and highlight and all that through additional maps. So that is now our texture applied. We open up our Hypershade again. We're going to just go to the rough spec and apply that. So find our roughness map. There we go. Now remember, this is flipped to a normal specularity map, where specularity is the darker it is, the rougher it is, or the less specular it is, the lighter, the more shinier it is. With this, the lighter the colour, the rougher the surface. The darker the colour, the shinier the surface. Because we're just basically going to keep our specularity channel on 100% and use a roughness map to control any sort of specularity. Because remember, everything is specular. Everything in the world, besides that crazy paint, that black 2.0 paint, everything is has some form of specularity to it. So I'm going to plug that in. Now what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to change the colour space, because Maya will want to actually change the way this is being seen, and it tries to calibrate the image, which might mean it brightens everything up or it darkens everything down. Now if we just do a quick render of this HUD as it is at the moment, oh, so we've got a problem with the... So again, this isn't something that normally happens inside Maya, this is just purely down to my system not liking things. So there's a couple of different tricks we can do for that. Okay. So I think if we just unplug some of these materials, I think that might be what's causing the issue. It's trying to find materials that aren't actually there. So if I just have them two in there, that should then fix our issue. There we go. So yeah, just me plugging everything in ahead of time and then going back, that's just caused that problem. It's looking for a black image when it needs to be processed as something else. Okay, so looking at this, we're not getting, because the map is the actual roughness map for this has got quite high whites, and the low sections are fairly bright already. We're not getting the most intense highlight differential. There we go. So that's just repositioning the camera a little bit. Now I'm getting that highlight there. Now this might not actually change that much, but what I'm going to do is actually change the rough spec color space to raw, because I'm just going to tell Maya, don't try and change anything, just use the image I give you. So I'm going to change that to raw, and then I'm going to update the sample. And you can see there it's actually changed. We've lost that glaring highlight like that. We've lost that glaring highlight, which is probably for the better, because now the highlights that are going to be seen are the ones that actually want to be used. See, already for me that looks a little bit nicer. We're already getting a little bit more depth in this image, which is great. Okay, cool. So we jump back to, we just stopped that, jump back to our Hypershade here. So our height map, we're going to bring in the height map. So you can see that. So a very, very simple map. The 50%, maybe 20% grays there, just giving you our height. Our darks are actually going back in. So I'm going to put that right in there, and I'm going to plug that. So plug that back in. Out value to normals like that. There we go. And then I'm actually going to do the same thing with this here. Exactly the same thing with this, but I'm not going to put a bump in front of it. I'm just going to put this directly into the displacement shader. So color out to color displacement shader. And I'm going to plug the height map into this as well and not change any of the color space. We'll check that, see if it gives us the best results or better results, but we'll just see what happens first. So plug that in. So everything is now plugged in. We should just be good to go now. So click to update, because obviously we've got the swatch turned off. So if I just click that update, that should now update everything for me. I'll run that again. Okay, so this is the issue we're actually having last night. We have plugged in our normal map, our bump maps and our displacement maps, but we're not seeing the results of that. Now, one thing I completely overlooked was we have to tell Arnold and the shader to actually produce these bump maps and normal maps. And that's very easy to do actually. Again, stop the shader, open up Arnold. If we just click on this bump map 2D, the AI bump 2D, we have this height map here, this bump height. At the currently it's set to 0.01. It's quite small, so I'm going to put that to 1. And then if I grab my object, I'll grab whatever I'm putting the texture on, go to this shape. So in this case, it's just a P-plane shape. I want to come down to the Arnold drop-down tab, and I'm going to come down to the subdivision area here. Just underneath export, I'm going to come down to subdivision. And then underneath there, you've got type. Now, there are different types of subdivisions, and we're not talking about actually adding physical subdivisions like smoothing. This is more of a rendering thing. So within the render engine, it will subdivide the mesh into subsequent faces. And there's a couple of different ways that have been created to do that. The most common and best to use is a Cat-Clark or Catmull-Clark subdivision. I couldn't tell you what the Catmull-Clark subdivision actually, well, I can tell you what it does, but I can't tell you how it does it or why it does it. But we just want to set that to Catmull-Clark or Cat-Clark. And then inside the iterations, just set that to either 10 or 8. Because what's going to happen now, it's going to kind of, I'll go in steps actually, it's going to kind of like subdivide the surface each time. So 0, there's nothing in there. If I set that to 2, you can see there's a tiny bit of movement to the surface. If I set that to say 5, you can see these raised surfaces are starting to make themselves seen a bit more. So that's at 8. There, we're really starting to see those individual bricks now. And if I set that to 10, really seen. So you can see how strong that is now. We can kind of see what's going on as well, because it looks like there's a graphical error with the shader, because our box for our material, or the wireframe for our object, is below our surface at the minute, but that's because our displacement map is lifting off the surface. This is very cool. So this is a way for us to develop or to create masses of information very quickly, very cheaply. Now what we can do as well is go in and see what will happen if we go in and change the color space for our height maps. So if I just go to the geometry tab, right click on bump mapping out, and then just change the color space to say raw. There's a little bit of change there, but not a whole lot. It's not super changing the actual image itself, so not a massive difference. The biggest difference for that is going to be within the spec map, because it's trying, for some reason, for that specularity, it's trying to just throttle those values too much, and we lose, well, we get that overblown overlowing specularity, where we really want specularity in choice areas. Now, if we actually examine these images, and stop that, and we actually examine these images, we can see that they are very, very simple, very, very basic. So just the simple tile texture here, so let me just change. Okay, I can't show you in this because just the way I'm recording it. So what I'll do is I'll just plug each one of the images into the material. Okay, so if we have a look at so that's our base color. That's all well and good. If we have a look at our height map, so that's just our height map. You can see it's not very detailed. It's quite low res in the grand scheme of things. There's a tiny bit of information just with like little spots of what would be concrete, but all that's really pushing is the depth in which each one of these segments is fitting in and the height. And then you've also got that slight little embossment around the edge that just goes from a dark to a light, which gives you that actual gradient going up. Incredibly simple. So if we now change that to something like the roughness map. See, this is the roughness map, so you can see here that, let's change that to a raw. You can see here that we're getting not a whole lot of information. It's mainly just piecing out certain parts of the mesh. So again, very, very simple. And you could probably, if you created this by hand, creating a roughness map for this, it's going to be incredibly easy. If we have a look at another map, so let's go for the broken tiles, because that's got a lot of nice information. So the broken tiles here, that's very, very simple. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 by 8 tiles there. And there's a few broken tiles. Now, what I'm kind of seeing with this is if you make your own, just black and white grid, no colour or anything like that, it's black and white grid, and then you created a single image which was the blue material with all the scratches going in the same direction. You could incredibly easily just start to grab especially if you were dealing with something that was like 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels, you grab 80 pixels by 80 pixels, you start shifting that around, turning that around, moving it around. You can start to replace these very easily. You can make your own pattern very easily in Photoshop. And then these little black spaces here, again, that could just be another layer on top, which you put a cloud layer, a very dark cloud, so quite light grey but then very dark grey, and then just mask off certain areas. So you put a black mask down so you can't actually see this dark layer, and then you only put white squares where you actually want that layer to point through. So that'd be very, very easy to create, and we'll actually be creating our own, so don't worry about me just explaining it and expecting you to understand it. We'll go through and create this sort of stuff. Because then if we look at the additional maps to this, the ambient occlusion one, if that was created properly, like with a bake, that's incredibly clean. But even then, this is so simple. This is just there's even some artifacts of it actually being made inside Photoshop. This is incredibly easy to make. Again, just taking that grid, making it a little bit lighter, you bring a mid-grey as your lower layer, and then you just bring in some of these darker grey areas to put on there. Boom, that's your ambient occlusion map. We look at now the roughness map. So this is pretty much the same map, but where they've taken the blue material, they basically just invert the blue material and the white material. Monochromed it and desaturated it, messed with the levels. Inverted the grey material so it's lighter this time. And they have a perfectly usable roughness map. So this sort of stuff is incredibly easy to make. And like I said, we'll be using these ourselves We'll be creating these ourselves, and like I said, very, very easy, very, very fun as well. Something that I do to pass the time is just make my own materials and just have fun. And I've got 20 minutes while pasta's boiling. What can I do in 20 minutes? I'll blast out some materials. So yeah, that is what we meant to cover last session. What we'll be covering next session is how we can then apply this sort of stuff to our own scenes and start thinking about the different surfaces we're going to be using. So the marble textures, the stone textures, the metal textures, the glass textures. We're going to look at how glass is produced, like believable glass with refraction, using that IOR that we discussed last night, the index of refraction inside the material, all that sort of stuff. And quite quickly, we'll be able to create a lot of very cool outcomes. Because as you'll find, you'll probably be using the same texture over an incredibly large amount of surface area. So yeah, we're looking at that next. If you've got any questions about this, or if you want me to re-explain something from this, just send us an email or grab us, because I'm going to be coming into the school tomorrow night to do the remote teaching. Grab me then when we're on Discord and stuff, and we'll sort it out. Cool. I will see you soon.